Welcome to Choosing Wealth, where we talk everything personal finance, money, and real estate. Today, we're going to be talking about how to buy your first house, or if you haven't bought a house in a while, just a refresher course on what it's like to buy a house. We're real estate investors. We bought 7 houses over the last couple of years, including we bought 4 last year. So we bought a few houses just recently. And so we thought it'd be good to have some tips and tricks. You know, if it's your first house, maybe you'll find something useful to avoid some of the mistakes that we made. We bought our first house and our second house and the third house. So, you know, it's good. You learn tips as you go. And so if you can avoid some of these mistakes that we've made, hopefully we can help you out, because all the mistakes are financial. It's always financial mistakes. What we're going to do a little bit about the format for this one. We're just going to talk about the process, just in case you've never bought a house before. We're talking about a little bit just about the steps on buying the actual house. And then we're going to talk about some things that no one else seems to talk about. And hopefully you'll be able to take a lot of information and apply it to your life. But just in case you're joining with us, not on the video version and you're on the audio version, this is my wife, Rachel. And she is the design aspect of our real estate investing business. And she used to swing a hammer for
I did
the first couple of years. Not anymore, but.
Yes, I did help with construction for our first 2 properties. But now I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So I am busy chasing them around.
Yes. And one more in
Any day.
7 days.
Any day, yeah.
7 days. So a little bit about the process. So when you're first buying your first house, what you're going to want to do is you want to get pre-approved with the lender to figure out exactly what you can qualify from a mortgage standpoint. And this is tough. From a personal finance channel, we think that you need to be financially stable in order to buy a house, because houses are expensive. But your lender will be able to tell you what you'll qualify for. Right now, it's typically about 43%. Granted, I'm not a licensed lender, so make sure you go and talk to a licensed lender. But it's typically your debt to income is about 43%. That's what they'll qualify you for monthly for a mortgage amount.
What does 43% mean?
So they're going to take your gross income, and then 43% of that can go towards all of your debt. That's going to include your mortgage, any credit card debt, any car debt, so things like that. So if you want to qualify for the most mortgage possible, pay off your debt.
Yeah.
But you also should just pay off your debt anyway. But yeah, so that's what that means. But they'll explain more about that. That's what they'll talk about.
And they'll give you like your monthly number.
Yeah, but that's
of like what can you afford for a mortgage?
That's going to be not really afford. They're going to say afford.
They're going to give you a higher number than what you can really afford.
Yeah, I think that they're going to give you a number to get you into a house, but I think it's going to be higher than I would want to spend. Just
you don't need to take the highest number.
Yeah, but essentially they're going to tell you, because
if they say you're approved for $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month, that doesn't necessarily mean that's wise.
But before you start looking for houses, they're going to give you a price point based on your monthly income on what you're allowed to spend or what they'll qualify you for. So that way you know like how much house to be looking for. You know, if you've got to look for houses in the $100,000 range, that's what you can afford. There's no point in going and walking $250,000 houses.
Right.
Or, you know, or if it's, you know, you're in a neighborhood like anywhere else but in Western New York where the houses are $300,000 and, you know, that's what you qualify for, but houses are $500,000. There's no point in walking those $500,000 houses because you're not going to be able to buy it anyway. Realtor's not going to want to show you. You're going to be wasting their time, and you're going to be wasting your own time. So first step, get pre-approved. Second step is find a realtor. And this is tougher than you would assume.
It's a lot harder than you would think. Like, I think it's really worthwhile reading reviews online of people. For our first house, when we sold it, the realtor ended up being not the realtor of our dreams. And, you know, that was hard.
It's so for that realtor specifically, she spent more time negotiating with us and not enough time negotiating with the other parties. She was trying to convince us of things because we were young. She was trying to convince us of things that we didn't want to do, essentially. And a deal that was not, or terms that were not favorable for us. But they were favorable for her because it would push the deal through. So I think that that's something that's important to look out for, is the realtor that ever says, oh, I'm in it for the win-win. That is a huge red flag for me. I will never work with anybody that says I'm in it for the win-win. No.
Like when they say we want them to win and we want you to win. Like we want the people selling you their house to win, and we want you buying their house to win. Well, they work for you. So your realtor should be getting you the best deal on the house. They should be getting you the best number and, you know, whatever extra things you're asking for, whether it's appliances or you want to have something fixed or whatever that is before you actually get the house. They should be negotiating that on your behalf and working for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think realtors.
because you are paying them.
Hey, bud. The video version, if you see Kevin, our dog, just sat up. He's usually asleep with the kids by now, but
Party animal tonight.
Yeah, he wanted to join us. He's past his bedtime. It's 9:45 now, so he's awful tired. So yeah, so get pre-approved, find a realtor, make sure you do your homework, and then hey bud. And then third is start looking for houses. Find a house.
This part is fun. It can be fun to go look at houses and, walk through houses. I think you need to figure out what you really need in a house. What are your deal breakers? Whether that might be how renovated it is, or maybe it's how many bedrooms you need, or garage, or whatever it is. Figure that out ahead of time and then have fun looking.
So steps so far: get pre-approved, find a realtor, start finding a house. When you find that house, place an offer on it. So try to get an inspection if you can. I know it's difficult in some places still, even post-COVID, but definitely if you can do it, I would. But keep in mind, that's not free to you. That's going to cost you some money. They're $300 to $500 depending on where you are. So just plan for that. But keep in mind, if you don't have an extra $300 to $500, like if that expense pops up and you're like, oh, I don't have an extra $300 to $500, I don't know if you should be buying a house.
Yeah, I don't know if you can afford it, because we're going to soon talk about unexpected costs that come up.
Yeah, because houses are really expensive, and houses are great.
They're a great investment, but you need to be able to afford it.
Yeah, exactly. Then the next thing would be closing and how long it takes. And that one's pretty straightforward. That was just going to be stated in your contract. Typically, if you're closing in cash, about 4 weeks, sometimes a little bit less. I guess this just depends on the state. We're talking specifically in New York, because I know if you're in a title company state, it's a little bit quicker usually, but there's a lot of red tape in New York because we're an attorney state. So 6 weeks, 8 weeks, it really just depends on the title search and how quick you can close the loan. But that'll be stated in your contract. And that one, I would say is self-explanatory, but just know that, you're 6 to 8 weeks out, even after.
And be aware of that. Like if you're in an apartment, you need to be thinking about, okay, like when does my lease end? What's the penalty if I leave, early? If, will they agree to, once they find a tenant, to cut me like the last few months? Yeah. So like those are the really good things to think about ahead of time, because, that's really expensive if you're paying your first couple mortgage payments and you're also paying for the house that you're renting or apartment you're renting.
And also, like North Carolina it's a state where we're going to close on this day at this time, and you close on this day at that time. But New York is like, we're going to close generally around this date. So it could be sooner, it could be later. Like one of the houses that we sold this year, they were ready to close 2 weeks before. Like it was a 4 or 5 week close, and they were ready to close in 2 weeks. Yeah. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is the quickest ever.
Yeah, it was great.
But yeah, so keep in mind that it might be, if your lease ends that day and you're expected to be closed on that day, you need to figure out what kind of state you're in, because it could be like, it could be a couple of days more, a couple of, So
this is what you can talk to your realtor about.
Yeah, that is something they should be able to tell you, because, just be upfront with them. Hey, I'm moving out of an apartment. And also, if you have an attorney, be like, hey, I'm moving out of an apartment. I got to be out this day. We need to make sure that we close this day. And I guess if they're aware of it, then they might be able to push it through and make sure that it happens. But these are all things that, the whole process is super overwhelming. And
your realtor is going to help ride this process.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of the reason that you buy
They're
a realtor.
They're the person that's going to filter all these questions, and they're going to have attorneys and stuff that work with them. So you can just ask all these questions to your realtor, and they'll help filter through all this stuff.
So the next thing is to know about fees, and these fees are going to be collected when you buy the house. So up front.
Yeah.
So again, if you aren't financially stable, this is where buying a house maybe not the greatest idea. But so there's going to be normally what you put down for your mortgage, your 3%, 5%, 10%, 20%, whatever it is. So that's not the only cost that's going to be there. You're also going to have to pay taxes up front, insurance, and what else is there? There's closing costs, there's transfer tax. There's attorney fees. There's a bunch of fees. In New York, we're typically spending about $5,000 just in fees, and a lot of that's taxes.
And this isn't something like you pay later.
Yeah.
Like you bring this with you.
So like they'll collect in your insurance, or excuse me, in your mortgage for your taxes and your insurance, but they expect those to be preloaded. Like they collect in advance for your insurance and taxes coming up for next year. They're not like, oh yeah, we're just going to front you the money for your taxes and your insurance, and you're going to pay that back. No, you'll have paid into that before, and that's what they pay it with. So you have to front load it up front. Obviously, that's what front loading means.
Yeah.
So just something to be aware of, because if you're not prepared for the $300 inspection, the down payment, if you're barely scraping to get a 5% down payment, like say you're getting an FHA loan, and then you've got to pay all these closing costs, well, so that adds up.
Yeah, it adds up fast. And that's another reason why when they're talking about the houses that you can afford, like based on like your monthly income, it's better to, try to spend less on a house, I personally think, than hit like the very top of your budget. Because then when you have these, closing fees come in, or we're going to talk about in a second, other things that come with owning a home, you're not already just like barely able to afford that house.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want it to be a point of stress. And so we buy really cheap houses to live in because we don't want the stress of like, we just max out our budget. Our first house costs like $80-something thousand. $75,000. The house we live in now costs how much?
52.
So I knew it was. So, we like to spend not much, but then when all these things come up, it's not a big deal.
Okay, so now you finally closed on the house. So let's talk about extra costs. Extra costs would be, so let's say theoretically you're moving in, you're coming from an apartment. Okay, well, there's lawn maintenance at the apartment. So now as a homeowner, you got to mow your own lawn, or you got to pay somebody else to mow your own lawn. But that's really expensive. So you got to buy even if you buy a push mower nowadays, they're $300, $400. They're crazy expensive. You can't, it's not like back in the day when you get like a $99 bare bone, unbranded, like it wasn't even a Craftsman. It was like just had like a Briggs and Stratton engine. It was just we had like a black deck.
Yes, we had like
an engine.
Our first mower was like $300, and it didn't even have self-propel.
It was a nice one. It had a bagger.
It was not nice. It was not nice at all because my husband's allergic to fresh cut grass, which now he just wears a HEPA filter mask and looks like a zombie when he mows our lawn. And there's toddlers riding on our mower with him. But I pushed it.
Yeah, well.
And it was not self-propel.
My allergies are better when it comes to mowing and overall being outside. Okay, when you're behind a push mower. This is not
the allergy podcast.
When you're behind a mower, you're getting a lot of dust and a lot of like cut grass clippings and everything. You know what I'm talking about. But when you're on a zero turn, you are going so fast. You're moving at the speed of light. And everything's discharging out the side. And you're already gone by the time.
Good. I'll never mow again. I'm so
exactly.
Grateful.
So now we have a zero turn, and so now I mow because we have a zero. Well, because I not only mow our house, I also mow the flip houses. So like I got to mow a lot of yards.
Yes.
And
also rentals.
Yeah. So it makes sense to have a zero turn. So now we have a zero turn.
Another cost would be a dryer. Sometimes, you look out and you buy a property with a washer and dryer, and sometimes they don't have one. If you put an offer in on a house and you notice it doesn't have that, figure that out. How much does that cost?
Or even if it has a washer and dryer, let's say theoretically it's old, or it's like an Amana or something that's probably not going to last, you're going to have to replace that.
So you need to really budget that in.
Because it's not like, an apartment community or places, like those big apartment buildings, they're going to have laundry, or they're going to be in places that have laundromats close. But when you buy a house, that's not necessarily the case. There might not be laundromats that are accessible.
Yeah.
That, without having to drive a decent amount.
Yes. And so this would come into, before buying a house, really having an emergency fund, having some money set aside for things like this, like your washer and dryer going.
Exactly. So it's not, so this whole theme of this podcast of buying a house is essentially that buying a house is more expensive than you're going to realize. Not that we're trying to discourage anyone from buying a house, but.
No, we love buying houses.
It's just expensive. Homeownership is expensive. Like everything's expensive. And so the next thing that you're going to have to spend money on is trash.
Yeah.
Because no one thinks about trash, because you're like, trash is literally the last thing on your mind. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, the trash is piling up. I need trash. And it's $50 a month. It depends. There's some cities that have trash included, but we pay $50 a month for trash. And I'm like, okay, well, that's
our trash and our recycle.
Yeah, okay, well, that's $50 a month that I don't have. Because, if you're moving from an apartment, you're already going to have internet. Like most people pay for internet, so that you're already thinking, oh, I'm just going to transfer my service. Okay, well, that's $60 or $80 that you are already used to paying. Yeah. But trash is something that's free. You just take your trash down to the can.
Yeah. So now you're paying for it. Another thing is just like pest control. So, if you're going to buy a house that's been lived in recently, this shouldn't be that big of a deal. But if you're buying a house that's sat for a while, our first house sat for a couple years before we bought it. actually this house too, sat for a while. And so, you're going to need to buy the ant spray, the bug bombs. Hopefully you're not buying the houses we have that, might have a squirrel or two living in it or whatever. But you will have to buy, mouse traps, whatever. Just be aware of what you're buying and if you're going to pay for services or do it yourself. But in your inspection, hopefully they catch any kind of like insect
But
issues.
it's going to be something. You're always going to have something. And again, it's just something you're going to, and if you pay a company to come out and do it, it's going to be crazy expensive.
Yeah.
Like to have anybody come out and do it, you're spending at least $150.
So, I mean, you can just go to Home Depot, but even if that's just $50, it's like good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. I might have to buy some like pest control stuff. The last thing is moving costs. So, you've got to pay for the U-Haul, or, maybe you have friends with pickup trucks that can, we didn't have very much stuff when we moved into our first apartment. We only owned one piece of furniture then, so we did not need, we didn't need a U-Haul. But when we left that apartment, we did. So a U-Haul, the boxes, the tape. If you're hiring movers, hopefully friends with pizza and beer or pop,
If you're over 30,
out.
if you're over, let's say 35, if you're over 35, just hire movers. Because if anybody over 35,
we're almost 35.
Yeah, I know. If someone comes and asks me, hey, can you help me move? I'm like, no.
You just help someone move. He says this, but then he goes and does these things, and he's a nice man.
Oh, I did.
Our whole family went.
I forgot. I'm only 32, so I still got a couple of years. But in general,
Still have some testosterone.
But in general, I would plan for a mover because I'm moving's terrible. It's so
Moving
terrible.
is terrible.
I would really hope that when we move next, I would hire movers. I think the chances are really, really close to zero that actually happens. But in an ideal world, that would be really cool.
That would be cool.
If they packed everything. If they didn't pack everything, I'm like, well, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Carrying it down the stairs is not the hard part.
We have great friends, though. But anyway, moving and talking about moving costs, just making sure you can afford the transportation that you need, the boxes and all of that stuff, and pricing that out ahead of time, I think is important.
So the last and most important tip when buying a house is that your neighborhood matters. If you don't feel comfortable getting out of your car when it's nighttime and walking into your house, that might be a house that you're potentially looking at that you might want to reconsider. Or if you're a man and you feel comfortable, how does your wife feel? How do you feel about your wife walking into that house at night? Like if you're not home, if you're on a trip or a business trip or whatever, just something to think about.
Yeah, our first house that we bought, so, to the left was a neighborhood that had a lot of crime. We were in the middle. Our neighborhood was like the middle neighborhood. And then to the right was like really affluent neighborhoods. And I remember like my husband would go on trips and things. And I was worried. I was really nervous at night. And by the time we sold the house, I'm really glad we sold it when we did. The neighborhood kind of did go under. It just had a lot more crime than it did. And it was really great that we sold. We had a 9-month-old daughter at the time. By the time when we moved there, we had no kids. We left with a 9-month-old. And so I was really glad that we left that neighborhood. But I think now that we have like a family and young kids, I just think that once again, it's like, it's okay to save a little bit longer for a house if you can get something that's safe for your family. And you know what? You might have to fix it up. And it might be a hard conversation you have to have in your family. Like you might not be able to afford a house in a decent neighborhood that's all renovated. You might have to, go to Home Depot, buy a drill, go on YouTube like we did. We could not afford our first house. We could not afford anything but that. And we had to do all the work ourselves. We didn't even have the intention of like flipping it. We just like wanted to live in a nice house, but we had to build that house. And the house that we live in now, it was what we could afford. And our biggest, what mattered the most to us was that this neighborhood we live in is super safe. It's extremely safe and we have wonderful neighbors, but we couldn't afford to live here. So we had to buy the house with the flooded basement and the black mold. Thanks so much for joining us today. We had so much fun talking to you about things we wish we would have known when we bought our first house and just different costs that you don't think about ahead of time. And we hope that you didn't just find this to be discouraging, but really just encouraging you to think through your finances and dream about what house you can afford. Start budgeting. Like in our previous episode, we talk about budgeting and, how can you budget so that you can afford to live in your dream home.
Because you want your dream home to be a dream. You don't want it to think it's going to be a dream. And then it turns into a nightmare that you're stuck in because you can't afford it.
Exactly. And so we cannot wait to talk to you soon about more things about finances.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Check back next week for our next episode.